Hi, so today's thoughts, today's like little episode video is probably gonna be a lot more rambly than a lot of my other ones. I don't even jump on camera anymore too much to talk about stuff, but I just wanted to cover some of the dominant themes I've been thinking about and just, oops, spilled water. Yeah, just talk about some of the things I've been thinking about. I just had this thought and I was like, wow, that really connects to a ton of things I have been thinking about, and so I was like, wow, that really, that really brings everything together. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. I think, if you know me, you know that I always talk about like this idea of like recycling, reducing consumption. It's not in reducing consumption, no new things. Recently I learned about like the slogan no new clothes and stuff that really like resonates with me. Regeneration is a theme that is like kind of important to me philosophically. I don't want to be like snooty about it or anything. I also don't think that being green is like a very important part of my ethos and like just like personal philosophy. Like I like, not to say that that's not important, it's just that I don't think I'm a particularly environmentally minded person, as in that's like the motivation for me to like seek out to do these activities or like why I find them so important. So yeah, that's always been like kind of a tension in my life, is just like, why am I so obsessed with like this thing of like, let's say recycling or like all of that, or just this, closing the loop on, objects and material goods and all of that. Really never really had an answer because, in other parts of my life, I'm not a particularly, like, environmentally conscious person. Like, I think that I'm decent, but that's just not like, okay, like food wise, like in a lot of other cases, I actually think that, emissions, it's like not so much an individual thing, right? And nowadays I'm actually trending more towards that as well. Like it's all like on policy, it's all because of corporations. I mean, specifically like someone, I lost my train of thought, but oh yeah, the argument about like recycling being actually pushed by plastic companies apparently, in like the 70s or something, because there was like a whole movement. This could be totally wrong, so I'm gonna like link something, but to my understanding, there was like a movement to move away from plastics because they don't really decompose and they're like very bad for the environment, obviously. So then the plastic industry invented recycling, like, and the efficiency of recycling is actually really poor. So all this to say, I mean, I worked, volunteered in a recycling facility for 7 years, so it's always been like a central thing. And it's philosophical, so it does apply to like a lot of other things, because I was talking with my friend Michelle, and we were commiserating about this perspective we have in like the inherent waste and inefficiency that comes with like, teens starting nonprofits and stuff, and like why specifically this thing rubs us the wrong way, or like anybody creating a new venture. And obviously that's like admirable and entrepreneurial and good, especially when it feels like a pre-existing need, like, like so many stories of small businesses do. But sometimes, like, to me, that just indicates like, a lack of foresight or forethought as to like, why is my voice specifically needed? What is the point of doing this? Are we just doing this so that I have something to do? Or like a way in which I can feel like I'm contributing, but it's not like the maximum effectiveness and stuff. And I again, like, I think this is also a tension in my life, is that I prioritize like efficiency and effectiveness in some ways, in a way that really like feeds into capitalistic culture. I mean, I think that is what capitalism is about. It's about like optimizing everything to the max, and I've also spoken about this to some length, but like capitalism is about, right, like we have a scientific way to determine what is the best, and like we want to go towards the best, and whoever can do this the best, they can specialize in that and they can have it all, and everyone else, you just go find what you're the best at. And supposedly that's what it's supposed to be. I'm just speaking off of like the principles of capitalism here, not like in practice and all that. I mean, that's also something that I've been thinking about a lot. I'm going on a lot of tangents, but for me, it's very important for me to return to like kind of what capitalism was supposed to be and contrast that with like late stage capitalism, what it is now, its inevitable conclusions, but at the same time measure it by its own yardsticks and like not to say like, you know, not to say that we have to measure it by its own yardsticks. It's helpful for me personally to understand like bare bones what it's supposed to be, what innovations it created. For example, you know, like specialization or whatever. I could be like totally wrong about this, by the way. If like there's something I'm wrong about, like you can feel free to comment or whatever, tell me about it. But yeah, that's just been something that's like kind of important to me personally, is like understanding that, so that I feel like we can address things better. Like I feel like it's just so important to like know the history of everything and stuff, which is not something that I would necessarily, and it's not just history, but it's just like the principles of it. And this is not something that I would necessarily have said even a year or two ago. I mean, history is always, there's always like these adages, right? Like those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, etc. And there's a certain element there, right, where it's like, on one hand, it's like it's kind of like, you know, we don't have to maximize the efficiency for experience. I mean, like, taken to the logical extremes, it's like, oh, so if one person has experienced this feeling, then nobody else should, you know? And so it's like kind of on one hand, it's like experience is what humanity is about, like, you know, discovering your own experiences. On the other hand, I think if you don't know history, you do start really from the ground up on a lot of things that you don't need to. And I have so much awe for what higher education has brought to me in terms of the appreciation of history and the just being able to surround myself with people who have, it's not just like knowledge to me, because I guess I surround myself with people who have more of an interest in like politics or, you know, more of the humanities, and the humanities are built upon it. The whole point of humanities is to build upon previous traditions and to be in dialogue with previous traditions. And, you know, the literary present, the author, yes, death of the author and postmodernism, but like the author also never dies because their works survive. So you're like talking, you're in conversation with them, debating them, debunking them, etc. So I think that, I mean, that's also a tangent, but I think just the ability in college to be able to engage so critically and also have people who are aware of history is, it sounds like elementary, but like that has been an amazing takeaway for me. And if you know me personally, I always talk about this because personally I don't feel like I have a historical root or that informs what I think. So honestly, like that is a shortcoming of mine. It's a weakness that it really takes away from not the validity of my claims, but just how deep and well thought it could be. And that's something that I think, you know, it's not just like history per se, but it's like, you know, when you see 10 teens like start new lit mags, like sometimes it's like, you know, like how much have you really explored of the available options to find that, oh, your option doesn't, you know, I feel like there's always ways to join existing things, and I think that's really informed a core part of how I participate in the world, perhaps. I think that it is a crucial missing factor of a lot of people who think like, oh, I can never join XYZ org, so I need to start my own, and, you know, there I can be in control and make decisions. And I think it is a mark of humility and such to, like, you know, actually go to join something else. But in another sense, and this isn't to say like you have to be an intern or you have to like do the grunt work, like I'm not saying that, I'm just saying like for a lot of orgs, like you can actually volunteer, and it's like crazy how like you think that you can't get involved and so you have to do your own thing, but like you can. And I never knew this, and now I do, and it's crazy. You know, I think that the information age has both like widened our access to our forebears through institutional memory and like access to information at our fingertips, and at the same time actively combats this, right? And I think, you know, a lot of people talk about this, how well, I don't know that a lot of people talk about this, but I think it's interesting because I think now you have so much access to so much information that it's literally mind-blowing. And it's just like the opposite side of that, just to like be more clear and to like explain upon it further, is that with so much information coming in, there's no filter. So you either have the algorithm filter it for you, which means if you trust the algorithm, you might as well trust the system, right? So if you don't trust the system, you need to be wary of algorithms, because those are what prioritize what you see when there's too much coming in for yourself to process by yourself. And therefore it's easier for the system to bury access to, you know, information, right? Like, I mean, net neutrality is one example of this, but there's like way more insidious examples of this happening. And so, you know, it's like you really have to know about the information in order to seek it, and they don't hide it completely, not yet. We're not at that dystopian level, but it is like, you know, it's not gonna be served to you, right? Like, and I think as consumers who might not be digitally literate, we assume that we are in control, and then we're not. You know, watch, if you are totally new to this, you can watch Social Dilemma. If you're not totally new to this, you can read some stuff by Jaron Lanier. I highly recommend those works. He really shaped my thinking on this subject. Back to what I actually want to talk about, 11 minutes and 47 seconds into this short video. You know, I personally find that, and I was, while thinking about like this whole like recycling and like building on top of previous people's thought and like history and such that like informs the way I perceive life and stuff, it made me realize that I'm very invested in continuing the legacies of people who worked before us. And I feel that if I don't root where I'm coming from in the steps of people before me, I'm bound to make a misstep. It's not just that, like, it's not a self-esteem thing. I just don't want to be callous. I think that, you know, there's this concept I learned about in like a poli-sci class that I took. I forgot what it's called, but it's called, like, I'll like put it in the description, I guess, but the professor was saying, you know, there's tyranny of the majority, which we all know, which is like a common criticism of democratic like societies, perhaps, is like, you know, you really need to have those protections for the minority thinkers or people who have different ideas than you, right? Because you can't just majority rules everything. There's also he said that there was something called like tyranny of the non-voter, something like that. Tyranny of, maybe like the concept was like dead people, right? People before you have made laws, now they're dead, they're not voting, but their stuff still influences who we are today. I can't say I disagree with that fully, but one of the things I do really agree, like, I do really think that we need to follow in the footsteps of, and we can change our direction, but we need to connect our path to the people who walked before us, right? So what I really wanted to kind of discuss is like forebears who worked in kind of under the radar spaces in like leftism, or they're not as hot topics as they could be. And I'm really, really intrigued by these kind of more niche, but like huge progressive wins at the time. Like things that were honestly, and continue to be, pretty radical achievements that are underutilized today. And some of the you know, and I think in the information, and how this connects to the information age, is that we have so much access to like what these people were working on, but it's hard for us to prioritize or remember their priorities when there's so much being served to us from all sides. And, you know, some of the ideas that I had were, I was thinking a lot about Aaron Swartz, and if you don't know his story, he was one of the co-founders of Reddit, and he also, you know, released a ton of stuff on Wikimedia, I believe, just like, you know, it wasn't like an Edward Snowden thing, it wasn't like classified stuff, but it was like JSTOR, like he was democratizing academia, making it all free, and for that he, you know, was convicted and sentenced, and he ultimately took his own life. So he was a prodigy, fellow Stanford, not an alum, he was a dropout, but you know, it was a very sad story of like someone who was very highly influential in the free and open source space in computer science, or not computer science, but just in tech. Recently I got into thinking about public access TV, which I was reading a paper, and it was talking about how public access TV was a very, like, considered a huge win at the time, because it was a way to carve out a community space for community members to post on and to make their voices heard through the medium of television, which, you know, Americans, at least before the rise of streaming, there was like so much, oh, this brings me to another thing that I want to talk about, but it's totally unrelated. But yeah, just like before the rise of streaming, everyone spent so much time watching TV, so, you know, having this public access TV, which comprises of community-based studios, and like all the cable companies actually were legally required to have studios where people could go in and, you know, just treat as a bulletin board, or they can broadcast their own things, local residents, and this is still in the law. And, you know, there are so many public access stations across the country, which I personally never knew about, because I guess the place that I grew up in actually doesn't have one, so I don't know. But yeah, that's something really exciting and interesting to me. I think we can really make use of these previous wins to do something good with them, and not let previous, like, stuff go to waste. Like, that is so important to me. Like, again, with the consumption, with the waste, with the recycling, like, it's not so much like born out of a nostalgia, it's not so much born out of like saving the environment, being green, etc. Like, I'm talking about people here, their ideas, but continuing their legacies is a way to honor and respect the people who have come before us. And I think, of course, like, build upon and push forward. I think it is a function of youth to really, you know, reshape and become those ancestors, right? Become those cultural ancestors, those forebears that are pushing, that like future people will be like, they're so conservative, because, like, you know, but like, I think the maintenance has to be done, and I'm not saying I'm there yet. Like, I think that there's a lot more history. I mean, this public access TV thing, I only found out about it like yesterday, and it's not like a huge thing, but it was like an important accomplishment for people who are trying to democratize communication, which is once again something we're talking about now with social media. Disclaimer, I do work for a local social media type project, but like, you know, like, now we're talking about this again, right? Like, huge communications companies, Facebook, Twitter, you know, like Google controlling a lot of our communication, and how we can, and like media as well, and how we can empower individuals to have their own means of that, of doing so. I just think that's really interesting, and I'm really invested in really trying to, you know, continue these things and keep them going. That's just something that I have found really intriguing recently, and I just, you know, and going back to that previous topic of like high schoolers like starting nonprofits and stuff, I'm also really invested in, like, I feel like I personally have really changed my mindset from high school, and I'm only 2 years out, you know, and like, when I was in high school, any engaging with community issues, I was in a very I lived a very, very sheltered, very privileged life, and every issue was very abstract to me, and I think a lot of the issues that we hoped to combat were like, you know, like, that we might talk about were like, we're saving the ocean or whatever, and I think like what it really comes down to, and what a lot of, it's like dialectical materialism or whatever. I think that is so important to preach, because I think that there's so much energy there. It's not all like for show. It's not all for like college apps. Like, that's why I'm starting a nonprofit. Like, there is energy there. There is moral energy specifically towards like wanting to make a difference and all that. But without the history part, there is nothing, in my opinion. I think without knowing what other people are doing, there is nothing, because you're basically going blind. And like, the ability to really shine a light on like, hey, like, this is what like real organizers are doing right now, and this is, because I think, okay, one of the things is like Instagram infographics. In my opinion, that really does come out of somewhat of a misguided thing, but it is insane, because you can look at how the youth are able to use social media to raise awareness and such. Raising awareness is like one goal out of many, but and probably isn't the most important one, in my opinion, but their ability to effectively utilize social media is amazing. And I think, to align that capability with the needs of, not just the needs, not just like the separate needs of like any org that's like, yeah, like we might need some social media, not that. Like, I'm talking about the core needs, the core functions of an organization. Mutual aid, right? Like, that doesn't have to be nonprofit. Like, it could be like a reading group or something. The sky is just the limit. And I feel so invested in, again, not wasting the potential and harnessing like the pure energy of like people like that. When I watch TikToks made by high schoolers, I'm always in awe, because I feel like I'll be the first to admit that like the environment I grew up in may not have been conducive to like activism or such, and therefore that's why, but just I'm so in awe and the same is shared by many of my friends now, is like watching them, and they speak so articulately and really get a lot of the issues. And I think how we can spread that further so that we can connect all the issues kind of back to very actionable steps, because that's the truth. Like, this stuff can be solved very actionably, like, let's say, a little free library where you distribute radical books, or doing literally just taping a 30-minute show. Like, it doesn't have to be bare bone 30-minute show, and submitting it to public access television where you educate everyone about a certain topic and really critically engaging with things. And it's not just like fluff, kind of. And I really do like the work of some of the infographic people. I just think like we need to push further into the channels that have been laid out for us, and we need to know about the channels. Like, that's part of my frustration, is like, I know about this, but I do now, and I want to like build upon that and learn more about these things and use them to our advantage, also to break out of our echo chambers. Because who's really watching public access television, right? Like, is it people who can't afford cable? Is it predominantly older people? What populations, and how does that cross with the populations that we already serve, right? And it's like amazing to me. Like, it's amazing. Doing like a public access show right now about like how to get your vaccine, right? Like, I don't know, it's just like, it gives me so much hope when I see stuff like this, and I contrast that to like before, when I just like really did not have enough knowledge to have hope. And I think about that all the time. That's part of what I meant by like my friends who know history, is like they know alternatives. They know about what other countries have done also that's good, that like could be implemented here but isn't. And so that leads to their frustration, but it leads to their optimism too, because they have actual stats for how things could change. And like, they don't have cynicism in the same way that I might, because even though they might be cynical of like, politicians, all of that, they know like other possibilities and alternatives. And it's like, it's like living in a speculative fiction novel, right? Like, it's like, when I was in high school, and even to some extent today, I was so jaded about what political participation meant, you know, what effects there were. It was kind of just like, oh, individuals can't make an impact, and we're not high up on the totem pole enough to do policy changes, so we kind of just might as well live our lives and use the private sector. That was kind of how I was brought up. To have people challenging my mindset in that way, knowing like what policies can be in fact implemented and such, is just, it's insane. It's so good. Like, I don't know, I talk about it all the time, but yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay, this was rambly, but I gotta get back to work, so yeah, see you next time.